Good morning, everyone. At least one clock in the room is telling me it's 10 o'clock, so I think we're going to make a start. And welcome to the September committee meeting of Environment and Infrastructure. I'd like to formally welcome Councillor Baird in her first committee meeting as Vice Convener. And I'd like to put on record my thanks to her for taking on the role and being such a support to me over the last few months. It's a complex and large service that we are involved in, so thank you for your help. Can I ask members to please use their microphones when they're speaking and to make sure that all mobile phones and other devices are in silent mode. This meeting has been recorded, and despite what you read in the paper today, I am assured that the system is working and it will be broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel sometime after the meeting. Can I also take the opportunity to welcome Perth Kinross Council's new Chief Executive, Karen Reid, to the room, who's joining us as part of our induction, I assume. So welcome, Karen. We'll all be on our toes now. Are there any apologies for today's meeting? No apologies. Are there any substitutions for today's meeting? No substitutions. Good. The next item is the minutes of last... Oh, sorry, declarations of interest. Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Baird.
I have an interest in paper 5 and paper 9.
Do any other members have declarations on any of the business of today? Good. Before we get to the minutes, I'd like to read out a very short statement on one of the items, which was the burial costs for young people from the last meeting. At the last meeting on 20th of May, the committee agreed a proposal to waive the fees for burials and cremations of children and young people under 18 years of age. Following a request from Councillor Dugan, the committee also agreed to extend this to 21 years of age, subject to costs identified being within the delegated authority of the Executive Director. Since that meeting, discussions have taken place at Scottish Government, Causeless Settlement and Distribution Group and the Causeless Leaders Group that local authority burials and cremation fees should be waived for age 17 and under. With funding support to be provided to the councils by the Scottish Government, the Scottish Government's intention is for this new arrangement to be implemented on 12th October 2018. As a result, I am pleased that we are able to confirm the committee's decision taken in May. Given the funding commitment by the Scottish Government, I would like to propose that, in recognition of the Council's statutory corporate parent responsibility, the committee agree to waive the fees for burials and cremations for anyone resident in Perth Kinross and entitled to aftercare services up to the age of 26 years of age. If agreed, all the changes to charges will come into effect from the 12th of October 2018 to coincide with the Scottish Government proposal and funding for burials and cremations for ages 17 and under. The additional cost to extend the age from 17 and under up to 21 years, as well as those resident in Perth Kinross entitled to aftercare services up to the age of 26 years, can be contained in the Housing and Environment Revenue Budget. So members, in conclusion, I'm asking the committee to note the Scottish Government's position with regard to providing funding for local authority burials and cremation fees for age 17 and under, with effect on 12th October 2018. To note that as a result, the committee can confirm the decision with regard to extending waiving fees for up to 21 years of age, and to agree to further extending the waiving of fees for those resident in Perth Kinross entitled to aftercare services up to the age of 26 years. Are there any questions or comments? Agreed. Excellent. Thank you. Item 3 are the minutes. Can we agree the minute of the previous meeting?
No.
No.
I'd like to raise a question on the minutes, please, Convener.
Go ahead, Councillor Lane.
Convener, as you will note in paragraph 2 of 279, the minutes, I asked a question at the public meeting at your committee. That was back in May, the 23rd. Do you think it's acceptable that the first response I have to this is at 2:45 the day before this meeting? This has obviously gone through your minutes, your pre-agenda, etc., and it wasn't picked up. I haven't had a response. So my first question is of you, Convener, if you think that's acceptable. The second question is that because I've had no response to that question, I was not able to get further information on the topic. And I was wondering if you would indulge us with being able to ask officers questions that would have come from that original answer, because I think it's a very important subject, the fact that we're closing all the public toilets in Perth and Kinross at the end of this month. And I've got questions as to how well known that is in the press and other questions relating to it.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. I don't think we are closing all public toilets from the end of this month.
Per city, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarification on that. You asked about whether this has come up at pre-agenda, I think. Was that your question? Or
Question was it acceptable that I had no response for a question that was told I would have a response from your officers and from at committee on the 23rd of May, and we were now at the 3rd of September with no answer? And then that stopped me from asking further questions of the officers.
I don't think that's acceptable, and I'll ask Barbara if she wants to make any comment.
Okay, thank you, Convener, and thank you for the question, Councillor Lang. No, it's not acceptable. It was picked up at pre-agenda, and following that, there was another failure in the system. We did change the system about how we were dealing with, elected member queries from committee. Quite clearly, it hasn't worked, and we're going to go back to the old system to make sure that is picked up in future. And I apologise, and I think Willie apologised to you yesterday for that lateness of that.
Thanks. And for the second part of the question, can I now ask the questions I would have asked the officer? Because we're running out of time because of the closure of the various public toilets across Perth and Kinross at the end of this month.
It's not on the agenda for today, so what I'll make arrangements for is for the officer responsible to make contact with you immediately after the meeting, and you can ask questions of them then.
But the questions are relating to that can be put out in the press to inform people that the toilets are closed, and I don't want them appearing along at the toilet on the 1st of October to find it's unopened. I don't know if we're putting out press release. I don't know if we are informing all the comfort schemes, the hotels, etc., that provide them, that there will be no public toilets and there'll be an uplift in their usage. Have we written to them? There's various things. I don't know if the portaloos that we're putting in have child changing facilities. There's questions like that I'd like answered. They should have been answered months ago, and you're now, it feels as though you're doing the same as your education committee, where your vice convener not want to slap people down and put them back in their box. This is meant to be open democracy.
I don't think anybody's used the word in this committee, slap anyone down or put someone back in the box, Councillor Lang. I think you would accept that. The information on public toilets is on the council's website. I can't answer the specific questions for you because I don't have that detail to hand, but I will make sure that the officer that can answer those questions makes contact with you immediately after this meeting, and will make him or herself available to answer them. But it's not on the agenda for today.
Okay, if you're not willing to discuss it or let people know, that's your decision, convener.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions, comments? Councillor Williamson.
Yes, it's in relation to item 282. I raised the issues of vehicle-activated signs in Tummelbridge and Strathtummel, and it was agreed that they would be actually included in the list of appendixes of signs or places that were going to get signed, but there's no mention of that addition within the minutes. So is it possible to have that included, please?
I remember you asking that, Councillor Williamson. I remember asking that is added to the minute. Is there an officer that can deal with that?
Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Chick, but there's no mention of it in these minutes, so therefore the minutes are an inaccurate record of that meeting. There was a request to actually have Tummelbridge and Strathtummel included in those minutes, so they should have been included as an addition to the minute. I understand they are going to get done, and that's not the issue, but there's no mention of it in the minutes.
Councillor Williamson, I think the minute will be amended accordingly. Is that correct, Christina? Any other questions on the minutes?
Yes, please, convener. It's on the Crieff bid funding for their project. I was looking for an update because I believe the chief executive of Crieff bid, who came and did the presentation here in May, has now left post, and I was wondering if because the funding was put forward to specifically be in this financial year, I was wondering if the project is still on course, if it's still going to be happening at the first 10 days of December, and I was wondering, as we were giving the money out in 3 different tranches, if the where the project is, and is the project going ahead?
Barbara has some information on that, I believe.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Lang. Yes, you're correct that there has been a change in terms of sort of the leadership of that sort of project. My understanding is that the project is not going ahead this year, and no money has already been given to sort of Crieff bid as a result of the actual approval of that decision last time. We have been in discussion with Crieff bid. Our view is that there will be a requirement to put another sort of bid in next year, and if there is any money remaining from that pot, because it is 1 year funding, the actual committee report, the council decision was that any money left over from any of those budget motions would be held in reserves for that purpose. So we're expecting another bid from the group for next year.
Thanks, Convener. Just following on to that, and it may not, depending on what time of year the event takes place, I was inquiring do we have an SLA with Crieff bid that involves having the manned toilets open throughout the year, and how that would, if we're breaking that SLA, if we do have one, by closing the toilets in Crieff at that time?
Please go ahead, Barbara.
Thank you. I'm not an expert, unfortunately, on the Crieff bid SLA, but my understanding is that the council is only required to provide core statutory services, but there are opportunities from the bid mechanism to lever in additional finance for enhanced services as required, but I don't know the actual detail of that.
Councillor Donaldson.
Just to follow up on that point, then you wouldn't view that the service level agreement as a legally binding contract, that it's purely a modus operandi?
No, what I'm saying, sorry, for clarity, Councillor Donaldson, is that the provision of statutory services, public toilets, does not fall into that as part of the council's position.
Could I ask an officer to read the SLA and get back to me, because I've read the SLA and it states that we will have manned toilets, and I take it that's throughout the year, and I was wondering about your Tory administration decision to close the toilet over the winter, how that affects the SLA, please.
Hang on.
I would have to ask officers, but I promise we will come back to you on that very quickly, Councillor Lang.
Sorry,
Thanks,
Councillor Lang.
and that's everything I've got in a minute, so we're glad to know.
I apologise, Councillor Lang. I thought you said you were going to read it out, so I thought you had it with you. I misheard your question. Apologies.
I think I've done enough. It's about 8 pages, so I think you wouldn't want to hear my voice for that long.
Councillor Donaldson.
Yes, I just want to follow up on the funding for the Crieff bid event. With this particular pot of money, I just want clarification. I'm right in saying, and I ask the Director of Environment, is this funding only for 1 year? Because my understanding was in some of the other pots of money, it could be transferred over into the next financial year. And it's not really clear, the criteria between these different funds, it does seem to me somewhat blurred.
Thank you for the question, and for clarity then, the original budget motions money were for 1 year non-recurring. What the head of finance wrote into the council paper was that for non-recurring or any budget motion monies, if they were not spent within the financial year to which they've been allocated, then they would be held in reserves and used for that purpose in future years.
Councillor Dugan, I apologise, you had a question.
It's all right, Convener, thank you. It's not a question, Convener, if it's okay, it's just an observation. And you, like I, will recall that some of us on this committee were raising our eyebrows, to say the least, that the Crieff bid application had come in at the very same meeting where the criteria was to be agreed. That appeared to some of us to be something of unedifying haste and coincidence that these two things arrived on the same agenda. And I think, whilst I think it's probably a positive for Crieff that this will have another 12 months to regroup and come back with a better product, hopefully. But what I would ask for your assurance Convener, is that lessons will be learned from trying to push things through slightly too quickly, and that sometimes it's better to take a breath and do things at a slightly more controlled pace in future.
I remember your comments very well, Councillor Dugan. Thank you very much for that. Any other questions on the minutes? No. Okay, we'll move on. Even though there's changes. The next item on our agenda is the services BMIP, which Barbara will introduce, and I think we have some extra members of staff with us for a particular reason. Barbara will tell us more about that.
Thank you, Convener. I'm pleased to introduce the first business management and improvement plan for housing and environment since the formation of the new service on the 1st of April this year. The BMIP is the result of a number of sessions held with the service managers and team leaders from across the new service, and these proved to be an excellent way of bringing the service together. This high level of input and engagement has led to the development of a combined service aims, along with the culture which we wish to create across the whole service, which are outlined in the report. The 4 service aims combine those of both services and draw the new service together in ways which both former staff groups can readily identify with. We've undertaken a cross-service self-evaluation, and it is from this that our new BMIP has been created. We've also taken the corporate and community plans into consideration, and as such, our BMIP reflects both those documents in terms of strategic aims, the contribution the service will make to their delivery, the commitments we are making for the next year, along with the targets we will measure our performance against. In addition, our BMIP reflects the annual performance reports of the old services which were approved at the council meeting in June. We have also looked to be realistic in what we aim to do, taking into account future financial challenges, increasing demands for our services, as well as what we know in terms of emerging legislation and national priorities, such as the Planning Bill and climate change. Our BMIP has to be a high-level strategic document, and as such, it cannot reflect all of the work undertaken by the many and diverse services across the piece. These will be picked up through individual team plans, which will be monitored by the relevant service managers across the service. There are also policies and strategies, such as the winter maintenance policy, on the agenda today, which support the overall work of the service. Clearly, we may not get everything right, and we may not manage to do everything outlined within the document. However, what is clear from the work we've undertaken so far that there is a huge degree of commitment and energy across the whole service, and that by working together with yourselves, our partners and our communities, we will focus on delivering the best services we can. And if you could indulge me for just a minute, sort of in terms of celebrating our customer focus, which is highlighted in the Organised to Deliver section, there are a number of staff sitting in the back here who demonstrate that. The Customer Service Excellence Award was initially developed by the Cabinet Office and initially called the Charter Mark to offer services a practical framework for driving customer-focused change within their organisation. The Food Safety Team, a very small team, sort of very focused on what they do, first achieved the Charter Mark status in 1999 and have successfully retained the award status following on site assessments by the scheme's auditors for 20 years. Which I think everybody will consider to be a remarkable achievement, most recently passing the assessment in July 2018. The Customer Service Excellence Standard tests in great depth those areas that research has indicated are a priority for customers. So again, I would like to give my thanks to the whole team, and particularly to Fiona Patterson, Pauline Pease, Sally Lane and Karen Spalding, who are representing the team, and would ask that sort of our recognition goes back to the whole team for that remarkable achievement. I'm happy to take any questions on the Business Management Improvement Plan with support from other members of the Housing and Environment.
Do we have any questions? I see Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. I just have a question with regard to waste recycling. I wondered how Perth Kinross Council are performing in comparison to other local authorities.
Thank you for that question. We are, from the last local government benchmarking framework, we were 7th out of the 32 local authorities.
Thank you, Barbara. Next up with her hand up was Councillor McCall, followed by Councillor Williamson and Councillor.
Thank you, Convener. First of all, I just wanted to state that I think this is a very positive plan, and I love the business head social heart. I thought that certainly spoke to me. And the sort of rural community transport, I think that's also a very good idea. I notice that there is a commitment to complete the A9, A85 junction, which of course is very important to the people in my ward. I had read some papers recently that stated that this was originally a joint venture with the Council and the Scottish Government. Recently I seem to be seeing things that it's taken up by the Council. Is the government funding no longer available? Where are we with that? If somebody could fill in some blanks on that, if I've got myself wrong.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. No, the A9, A85 as part of the first part of the Perth Transport Futures was always going to be funded by the Council.
I made a mistake, and next up was in fact Councillor Parrott, followed by Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Convener. I'm on page 34, the second line of the table. It worries me slightly that we only have a target for 23-24 for 90% of operational buildings to be suitable for their current use. It seems to be me to be rather poor that we would accept a situation where 10% of buildings are not suitable for their current use in 5 years' time. Perhaps I'm missing something in the definition of the word suitable here, and I'd seek reassurance. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Parrott. This is, sort of one of these indicators that you wish you didn't have to put in, but I think is actually a very good, indicator. One of the reasons for it being 90% is, budgetary. I think that all the way through we've tried to be realistic in terms of, the funding that we have available for asset management in particular. But this also forms a fairly large, transformation project as well in terms of, the suitability of our assets and actually the number of assets that we own. So I would hope that as we progress that, we will be reducing some of these assets, but some of the assets that we do own are village halls, and there is a limit to how much we can do and how much money we have to spend on it. So I think that 90% is, every building will be safe, absolutely safe, but sometimes service needs change and the properties don't.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Convener. I've got two questions, if I may. Shall I give them separately? I think they'll be for different officers.
Let's do them one at a time, please.
Yeah. So first of all, I share some of Councillor Parrott's concerns about the about targets that level off. However, my questions are about some of the ones that are rather more aggressive and that I welcome. So I'm looking at page 28, the target around residential and business premises with access to next generation broadband. How are we measuring next generation? What's the Council's definition of next generation, please?
Thank you for that question. The Council's definition is the Scottish Government's and the UK Government's definition. So we would refer to it as super fast broadband, which I think is megabytes over 24. She said, struggling to find my briefing note, which is here someplace. But the Council has made significant improvements in that. It's still not 100% quite clearly because of the rurality of the area. But we started, when the original project started in terms of digital infrastructure across Scotland, across Perth and Kinross it was 42%, and now we're sitting closer to 84% of access.
And can we get confirmation of that number after the meeting? Is that?
It's fibre coverage for greater than 22 Mbps.
Okay, specifically fibre coverage.
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
And your second question, Councillor Bailey.
The second question relates to the first of the targets, the economic impact of events supported by the Council on page 26 or page 8 of the report. It's great to see such an aggressive target of us looking towards arriving at £13 million annual impact by 23-24. But I wondered, what is the model for estimating this? Because I assume these things are an estimate. We can't actually count all of the money going into the tills when we put on these fantastic events. Is there a model, is that a standard model, and can members maybe be sent a copy of that model of how we model for that, please?
Thank you for that question as well, Councillor Bailey. Yes, we've been using the same model for a number of years since we first started doing big events such as Christmas Light Switch On. It is the same model that's used by Event Scotland, Visit Scotland, and we can provide that. I understand that there is a change, sort of coming with that, if it hasn't already done so. So we'll be looking to see whether we continue with the older model to provide our own consistency, or we move to that. Part of the reason for the aggressive, change is obviously we're hoping that through the Tay Cities deal and, sort of the impact locally of, the changes to the City Hall and the V&A in Dundee, that there will be, as well as our own events, there will be, a draw across the wider region.
Perfect, thank you very much.
I think Councillor Williamson was next.
Thank you, Convener. Convener, the recycling figures seem to have flatlined at 0.5 of 1% for 17-18. That's on page 33 of this report. Looking forward, they do not seem to move very much, and considering we have to reach a target of 70% by 2025, and the costs of dumping stuff in landfill is projected to be 200,000, or increased to £200,000 budgetary pressure per annum. I was wondering if the convener could give me an indication of what the long-term strategy of the administration is around improving our recycling rates.
I'll ask Bruce to answer that, please.
There we go. It's on. Yeah, just in response to your question, the rate had flatlined for a period of time. We'd obviously taken action to roll out the 140 litre general waste bins. Those results have not come through as yet. For example, the rollout of the 140 litre general waste bins only completed in July last year. From that point of view, the results that we'll see will come through this year and the following year. So we're expecting to see an increase in that as well. The other decision that we took about 2 years ago was that the timber would actually go for energy recovery rather than recycling. That's actually dropped our recycling rate by an equivalent of about 4 to 5%. If that timber had gone for recycling, we would have been up somewhere in the region of about 59%, which would have put us in the very sort of top of the recycling league table within Scotland. However, because we're recovering the timber, we're actually gaining income for that material at this point in time. So that's why that decision was made as well at that time.
Convener, I think my question was what was the administration's long-term strategy around improving recycling rates?
It's to continue to increase our recycling as best we can. It's as simple as that. We have to keep going up the way. I think, sorry, Barbara, do you want? I think Councillor Donaldson, did you have a question? No, sorry. Councillor Ling is next then.
Thanks. If I can just make a comment on the last one, Convener, I'll just make a comment on the last one. I've got every confidence in our officers in the recycling. I think they do a wonderful job, and they will come up with innovative ideas, and I'm sure that we'll manage to achieve it. So I just want to... Don't mind me saying that.
No, I don't mind you making comments at all.
But the question, which was... I know that we have to set this target of 100% for rent collection, because to set...
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I know that it's on page 27, it's the bottom column, it's about rent collection.
Sorry, Councillor Ling, if this is about rent collection, that's a matter for housing.
I thought this was... Okay, wrong committee. I will bring it back again, or at scrutiny next week.
I will look forward to that.
Councillor Lane will look forward to that question at scrutiny.
Yes. Sorry about that.
I think Councillor Barnacle was next, followed by Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Just one point. One of the things that keeps cropping up in my ward area is the reduction in bus services. And the need for community transport schemes, and I note the aspiration on page 32 to increase the number of schemes particularly within rural communities. I've been to a number of meetings designed to try and improve that, and you have this service improvement plan, page 45, create a new transport in the community group to develop new initiatives. Well, I've been to a number of meetings where we've talked a lot, but nothing has actually happened on the ground. So my query is, well, what is our budget funding? It's all very well talking about initiatives, but you need the funding behind it to make these schemes come to fruition. So I'm not quite sure where we are with that. And of course, we're entering into a new round of budget discussions. Are we able, with the available budget, to deliver what we want to do on community transport schemes?
Barbara, can you?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Barnacle. You'll be aware that 4 out of the 5 action partnerships have identified transport, as in the community as an issue. There have been 2 meetings since last year with membership from the action partnerships local groups, as you've reflected, with groups that are interested in setting up such schemes. And as recently as the start of this week, we had confirmation that Aberargie Community Bus Group was fully established as a registered charity and therefore could then start having the discussions with us. There are a number of pots of money, within the council. There is the ordinary money that sits within the public transport unit, which is about £50,000 that we offer, as a bidding process to community transport groups. We also have the budget motion monies that were agreed by the former administration of £50,000 that has not been used yet because there has been a lack of, ability of the groups to be able to spend that money. And again, that's out for bidding purposes. And there is also the Aberargie Community Fund, which is specifically, set up to look at how, Aberargie can cope with the increased numbers of housing development. And it's that fund that the Aberargie Community Bus Group is particularly interested in accessing.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Convener. If I might begin my remarks by saying once again the IT is misbehaving. The microphone puts the officers in an embarrassing position, and I suffer from motion sickness, and the one up here keeps going off and on and in and out of focus. If necessary, we could have a whip round and send Stephen along to Argos to buy a microphone that works. It can't be beyond the wit of man to get IT that works.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Entertaining as that is, do you have a question?
I do, yes. Councillor Barnacle has preempted me slightly in his question to do with community transport. I too am looking at page 32 and 33. And I find improvement plans an interesting read because it's what we're all about. And the interesting wording I find on page 30 actually says that we will. It doesn't say we'll have a meeting. It doesn't say we'll talk about it for years. It says we will. And so taking Councillor Barnacle's point, the last bullet point about community transport, and perhaps more excitingly the first bullet point of the next page, which is taking forward the recommendations for our active travel strategy, that this work can't wait, and it can't wait till necessarily even the next committee meeting. And can we have an assurance that all the good work that we're saying that we will do, we will be updated as it happens, because I think it's very important that a plan is not about talking in meetings and more working groups, about actually doing something.
Thank you, I agree.
And I couldn't agree more as well, Councillor Simpson. Obviously, part of the process has to be with community transport is finding groups that want to be able to run that as well, and that's what we're actively doing as well. But in terms of the Bike Life Scotland, that's progressing well. We're hoping to receive the first draft of the Sustrans report in about a couple of weeks' time, and then that will set, a direction of travel, pardon the expression, for the council with that as well.
But that will be made public.
Once, obviously it will come as a draft, but the intention would be that we would bring that report back here.
Would you like the screen switched off, Councillor Simpson, if it's going to affect you?
No, not at all. Okay. I'd quite like it just to work. I'm easily pleased. I repeat my previous comments. If we've kept the receipt, we should be able to go to Argos and get another one.
Okay, IT systems notwithstanding, do we have any comments on this report?
A comment, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor.
It's just a comment on Mr. Reeky's helpful clarity over the figures on recycling. I think if I was listening correctly, he said that some of the contributing factor to that level is that we're now selling on timber for reuse. Was that correct?
That's what I understood it to be, but we can ask Bruce to clarify.
I've now got the technology to work as well, even better. Fantastic. You can hold the whip round. It was just to say, yeah, the timber now actually goes to an energy recovery plant in Markinch, and we actually sell the timber material for energy recovery. So it's no longer regarded as recycling, it is regarded as recovery.
Yeah, I think it's a subtle point, Convener. I think that's an appropriate use within the hierarchies of using waste materials. That's an appropriate use of a waste material. It's not going to landfill, which is what this target is set up to avoid. And it seems a shame that we're not allowed to include that. However, I can hear the answer coming. Well, it's not a question, so I'm not going to get an answer, Convener, but I'm certain we've got very little control over what this measure actually is, and I'm sure officers are applying it to the letter, but it seems to me a bit of a lost opportunity that we can't get credit for an appropriate use of a waste material in this way.
I agree with you entirely, Councillor Dugan, and just last week, Councillor Baird and I went to visit some of these recycling plants, and I was fascinated by the amount of recycling that goes on, and particularly wood and the energy that comes out of wood and the amount of money that's recovered from tin cans. So I'll be keeping my Coke cans for the future rather than throwing them in the bin. Any other comments? Oh, Councillor Lane.
This is me just trying to cover up my not paying attention and asking a question from the wrong committee. So I've thought of a reason why it might be. Is it the setup of this, is this new that we have one line that's referring to the Environment Committee, then another line, the next line's the housing, the next one? Did we not used to have them in separate packs, basically? The BMIPs came up differently? And is there not a bit, could we not have it compartmentalised, that we would have the environment figures at the start and then the housing and communities at the back? It would make it simple for simple people like myself.
And you can't possibly expect me to comment on that, Councillor Lang. However, it has been, a work of ensuring that the service is as integrated as we can possibly make it. In the past, when there was Environment Committee and Enterprise and Infrastructure Committee, then we used to have exactly the same discussion that we would just mark it for the relevant committees. It was always one report, and because some of the indicators and some of the actions tie in with, because they all tie back to service council objectives, then it is difficult then to separate them out as well.
Can I ask if the report can be agreed? Thank you. Right, moving on now to the next paper, paper 5, working with communities. As you may be aware, working with communities was presented by Community Greenspace to the Environment Committee in January 27 and was unanimously approved. It outlined the considerable work undertaken to engage, equip and empower local communities to participate in activities such as environmental and paths work, project delivery and grounds maintenance. It was agreed then that a further report be presented to committee giving an update, and I'll ask Andy Clegg from Community Greenspace to give that report.
Oh, and there we go, microphone on. So thanks very much, Convener, and good morning, everybody. I've been asked to keep this presentation to 5 minutes, so I'll give you a short introduction to the report, which contains all the detail. Okay, so Community Greenspace and engaging with communities. It's absolutely core to our service, whether we're developing policy, delivering projects, managing or maintaining our public green spaces. It is vital in ensuring our parks and open spaces meet the needs of our users, who are a very diverse bunch, and that makes it efficient, effective and value for money. It maximises our partnership working opportunities with communities, which engages, empowers and equips them. It also creates places which contribute to healthy living, civic pride and community coherence, which equals successful places. We currently support 48 bloom groups area-wide and the Take a Pride in Perthshire umbrella organisation that represents them all. And we think that's a unique organisation for the UK. They undertake a wide range of improvements and activities and benefit young, old, year on year, and contribute a lot to their communities. The Leafy Coo is actually now in situ in Burrell Square in Crieff and drives my dog nuts every time we go past it, but it looks fantastic. We also support 17 community path groups, again across Perth and Kinross, and with over 2,000 kilometres of core paths, they're absolutely essential in helping us keep them accessible and deliver a really important asset for the area, particularly from a tourist and healthy living point of view. We also support 8 community allotment associations, which are all self-managed and have developed the whole allotment programme themselves with assistance from us, and it obviously creates healthy activities and healthy living, producing food, etc. We support 4 Friends of Park groups currently: Perth Riverside Park, Pitlochry Recreation Park, Crieff Macrostie Park, and the Pride of Place group in Cooper Angus are sort of standing in for us at Largan Park and taking interest in that park. We also work with a number of sports groups, most recently in Blairgowrie and Auchterarder, and all of those volunteer groups equals thousands of hours of volunteering a year and hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of external funding that's brought into the council. Part of the transformation for the working with communities was the introduction of a Greenspace Partnership Officer who started with us in January 2017 and was on a part-time fixed-term post. A lot of the focus of that post holder was looking at the Perth Town Lade, and there's details in the report, but there's been a number of community action days, corporate volunteering to help clear vegetation, litter, and repair broken infrastructure, working alongside our own grounds maintenance squads. Some similar sorts of activities have been undertaken at Letham Dalriach. And she's also worked closely with a community group up at Rannoch Station, where we've transferred the grounds maintenance responsibility to a community group, providing training and tools to help them do that. We're also currently working at Rattery Common, where there's a rationalisation of shrub beds to try and reduce maintenance costs and encourage residents to look after areas adjacent to their homes. And this has facilitated almost 2,000 hours of volunteer time, and which would have cost us about £30,000 to do through contractors. Other partnership projects we've been recently involved in are the Blackford Community Play Park, completed this year, which is a £128,000 project, of which £78,000 was funded by the community. You can see the before picture, and hopefully you can see the transformation after. A completely different site and very much more well used. Also, North Muirton Community Play Park. This was a £220,000 participatory budget project, and again we raised an additional £34,000 into that from external funding, again before and after. So looking forward, we obviously want to continue working with this partnership model to deliver the vast majority of our services, managing and refurbishing the council's Greenspace assets. And future work and projects include the Crieff to Comrie Path Upgrade, which is a community-led and funded project and will be funded project. Canoe Hill, the Knock and Birks of Aberfeldy and Rumbling Bridge site management plans, again engaging the communities involved in those. A programme of creating accessible play parks with additional funding that was provided through the capital programme. Day-to-day support for bloom, path and allotment groups, as I've outlined to you previously. And the housing area shrub bed reviews to try and reduce maintenance. This has become an increasing problem for us. We've got thousands and thousands of square metres of shrub beds, and they're quite onerous to maintain. So any community involvement in that to help us reduce the maintenance is a major benefit. So thank you to all the local members who've been involved in this. I know we've got great support from all of you, and if you've any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Andy? Councillor McCall, followed by Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Convener. First of all, I just want to say that I think this is a fantastic report. Obviously, looking in my ward with Macrostie Park and St Fillan's, and even out to Auchterarder. With Macrostie Park, I just wanted to mention up here, I'm absolutely thrilled. I had a chat with Roz just last week, and they're hoping to make Macrostie Park Perth Kinross first dementia-friendly park, and I think that's an amazing step forward. I know we're doing the active all-inclusive for children, but I think that's an excellent thing. But I do want to sort of raise a concern that maybe has come forward regarding the properties on our parks. We have a lot of shelters, a lot of buildings, and I know we have to connect with the property department for that. Can you give me some indication as to how we do that and how we can make sure that the level of our buildings and properties on the parks are actually kept up to standard?
Yes, well, thanks, Councillor McCall. Yes, we work very closely with our property colleagues, so quite often vandalism would be an issue for the buildings on parks. So we would, as soon as we're aware of an issue, we would contact our property colleagues and they would put that into a work programme to try and repair those facilities. Otherwise, we look at maintaining the likes of the pavilion at McCrosty Park. There's another pavilion we've got open on the South Inch, and again, we work very closely with property colleagues in terms of the maintenance and upkeep of those buildings.
Follow on. So is there a way that we can look at, if we look at McCrosty Park, for example, where the pavilion is completely utilised and taken over, is there a programme actually actively, because you do such a good job in dealing with the different communities and getting of actually utilising these buildings into something?
Again, I think we would let the community drive that. So if the community wanted to use those buildings for a particular purpose, we would try and work with them to either develop the building or change the use of it slightly, and maybe they can help fundraise to make some of those improvements. I mean, again, the McCrosty Park example of the community raising funding for the new play equipment that's going in there is a good example. That was demand from the community. They raised the funding and we're helping them implement it. So we'll do the same for buildings.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson was next.
First of all, I'd like to echo the comments of Councillor McCall, and I think one is so grateful for the work that's been put in by the Friends of McCrosty Park, and we're going to see the culmination of their efforts hopefully soon. And also in St Philins with the playgroup. I'd also mention the Friends of Old St Michael's and Crieff and the work they've done there. But I want to turn specifically on page 52 to 2.1, and that's the Crieff to Comrie path, because that's an issue we debated and discussed this time last year. Through yourself, I'd like to ask Andy Clegg, what is the current state of play in terms of negotiations on that path? It may be that there's some things you can't say, but it involves landowners and also Sustrans.
Okay, thank you, Councillor MacDonald. Donaldson, yes, we had some discussions with the landowners last December, and they were very positive. Even the landowners who've been very resistant to accepting this route were actually starting to, come on board a bit. So that was very positive. Sustrans have provided us with funding to take the design work that we need to do to the next level. So we're looking at the detail of the bridges and the footpath specifications and that sort of thing. It's taken quite a while to actually get them on board. There's been all sorts of discussions about the fee levels and what exactly they're going to be designing and that type of thing, and adoption of these structures and things when the project's finished. However, we've managed to appoint them about 2 weeks ago, the consultants. They'll be doing the design work, and we can then go to each landowner and discuss the specific items that we're going to be looking to put onto their ground and hopefully get an agreement to those.
Supplementary.
Carry on.
Clearly, we hope to achieve this by negotiation rather than litigation. But can I ask what the timelines are? There is the working group. It involves, in particular, Crieff Community Trust, who just do quite fantastic work in terms of path maintenance, removing Himalayan balsam here, there and everywhere. But I'd just like to get a steer, because it's now 1 year on. What are the likely timelines?
Okay, well now we have the consultants on board. We're hoping that we'll get the detailed designs probably within maybe 2 to 3 months. We can then start opening negotiations with the landowners, and they can be notoriously difficult to time frame. It just depends on the landowner and how willing they are to reach an agreement with us. But hopefully with these detailed proposals, we'll be able to progress that quickly. Once the agreements are in place, then we would move on to trying to raise the funding for the project, because we know we'll have a definite project to go for. And that's a massive task for the community group to do. That's, I think it's a £1.1 million project, of which they're going to have to find about 90%. So,
just one final point. In terms of funding, though, Sustrans are likely to fund to 50%. Is that right?
that's my understanding.
Right. Hopefully we can achieve this through negotiation rather than litigation. But I do want to ask the convener, if push comes to shove, as a senior councillor, will this administration show the political will to actually push this forward? Because it is such a key project in terms of community benefit, not just for Crieff and Comrie, but in a wider context for the path networks through Perthshire. Will the convener give a commitment that they will, if it has to come to it, and negotiations don't succeed, that this will be put through?
I can't give you that commitment because it involves a political group that we have to negotiate with our partners. So I simply can't give you that commitment one way or the other. And I think you must understand that. So I'm sorry, I can't give you that commitment.
Okay.
I think next was Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, convener. Just briefly with regard to the last point, my recollection is that this committee did agree to take action to, if negotiations failed, agree to take action. So it is an agreed position of the council on that path.
Thank you for reminding me of that meeting.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I think this is a tremendous report, and it just says all the good things that this council does in working with communities, which I think is amazing how we've transformed, with the help of our citizens, transformed many parts of Perth and Kinross. But I've got a couple of questions. With regard to park upgrades, like I was at the Community Council of Glenalmond Monday night, and they're talking about making improvements to their Wallace Park. The equipment that gets put in, whether it's keep fit equipment or play equipment, and once the work's done by the friends of the park, technically, do we take over maintenance and responsibility for that?
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Yes, if the equipment that they're putting in is in line with our council standards and it's put into an adoptable standard, then we would take it on. If they ask for a lot of extra stuff that's over and above what the council would normally provide, normally we ask them to provide some funding for us to take on the maintenance, which is our standard commuted sum of 10 times the annual maintenance cost. And a lot of groups have contributed that where they've wanted us to go beyond what we would normally provide.
Thank you. The other question I was going to ask was, you can see the good work in areas where Bloom committees are working away furiously to keep the place looking good. But there's always corners which they don't maintain. You're talking about like shrub beds and things that we seem, as a council, seem to not notice when they get into a terrible state. Do we have some sort of way of actually monitoring what our beds are like? Because I'm continually emailing officers and saying, could we get this tidied up, please? How do we go about actually keeping our part of the bargain good? How do we actually go ahead about making sure the things that we're responsible for actually get maintained?
Okay, well, there was a grounds maintenance review undertaken in about 2013-14 when we looked at all the levels of different open spaces that we had and the quality of the maintenance. And I think, unfortunately, to meet some of the savings targets, we had to reduce shrub bed maintenance on what we call local sites. So they don't get visited as frequently, and the maintenance techniques that we use on them weren't as good as we might have done in the past. And obviously, that's where the shrub beds may look like they're not quite so good anymore. So those are the types of site that we're looking at with the Greenspace Partnership Officer to see if there's ways of getting the community to help us take those on, or just strip the shrubs out eventually and maybe just grass them over, or we take a decision that we just leave them and we let them grow wild. It just depends on the site location.
I don't know if it would be possible, convener, but I think personally I'd find it useful to get a list of these sort of areas within my ward, so that and I could actually raise it with community councils and other community groups to find out if an area that you're continually reporting has been untidy can be something can be done with You know, so is it possible to get a list of the, is that a huge, and I don't want to give somebody a huge amount of work, but if that's possible for us to get that, I'd find it useful. I don't know what other councillors would think, but I'd find
Barbara
it
is
useful.
telling me that that's absolutely fine. That will happen.
Thanks, Barbara.
I was saying that after Andy had nodded his head. I think that the important bit is, and the whole purpose of that transformation post was to start those negotiations, because we're well aware that, you know, sort of the budget in Greenspace in particular has reduced over a number of years, probably by about 50%. So the purpose of that post was then to have that conversation with communities, to allow communities then to take over areas that are important to them and are important to us, but we just don't have the funding to be able to do anymore.
Next up is Councillor Williamson, followed by Councillor Lane.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you very much. It's very welcome news to see the Rannoch Station initiative has been set up. That was over 12 months ago, and I'm quite sure that people are actually enjoying it. My question was about working with park groups. I think there's a great deal of misunderstanding or suspicion surrounding some rural park groups where, because of historical lease arrangements with landowners, etc., that's who maintains what. And I was wondering if there's an opportunity to recalibrate the relationship with the council and the local park groups to possibly manage the parks better, because I don't think that these groups want to engage with the council because of these historical lease arrangements that already exist. So I was wondering if there could be more work done to engage with some of the rural park groups and break down some of these suspicions.
Andy, are you happy to do that?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Williamson. I mean, we're more than happy to work with any park group wherever across the whole area. I think there are some historic parks that we don't have leases for, just because, you know, the council maybe took it over 40, 50 years ago and there was no proper leases and stuff put in place back in those days. So, you know, we would very much work with a group. If we need to put new assets onto that park through the capital programme, we would have to formalise some sort of agreement with the local group, either through a lease or a management agreement, or we would look at potentially look at taking ownership of the park, but that would have to go through a process, and we'd just look at that on a case-by-case basis. So, on any sort of an improvement projects we do, we always check what the ownership situation is and try and work with the groups if there's any issues on that.
That's another question. I think my fear is or my understanding is a suspicion to engage with the council, because there's a fear that they may end up losing what currently exists, i.e. the council maintaining the ground for them. And that's why I'm asking. I think we need to be a bit more proactive in engaging with some of the more rural park groups and try and break down some of these suspicions, etc.
Well, a good example was Muthill Play Park recently. We don't own that site, but the community raised a lot of funding to put the play equipment in, and we've just continued to maintain it. We reassured them during that process that we would maintain that park, and we have been doing it in perpetuity. So, you know, I don't see it being a major stumbling block at all.
Councillor Lane, followed by Councillor Parrott.
Thanks, Convener. I think this is a wonderful report. I think the most important part is 1.3, where it lists the engagement we have with communities. I think it's the way forward all across the council for all the departments and all the services, that we have to work with the community as finances become tighter. Quite literally here, we're giving people the tools to do the job themselves. But in other ways, we can give them the advice and the guidance. So, and this is the way that the whole local authorities all over the UK will have to, if they're going to keep providing services. So our officers are doing a wonderful job working with some wonderful people in the community to achieve these things. Can I now go on my parochial part of it is, and I've spoken to Andy about this in the past, we work with community partners. Do we work with landowners as well? Where I'm thinking in particular of the iconic beech hedges in my ward, which is probably now being missold as a hedge because it has not been trimmed for, I think, 10 years longer than it's meant to be trimmed. And I know that we've tried to engage. Is there any way that we, with such an iconic attraction to Perth Kinross, many people still come along. I don't know how they can even tell where the hedge is. If it wasn't with a big sign saying this is the hedge, they wouldn't know where it is. What can we do to engage with landowners to maintain something as iconic as the beech hedge?
Thank you, Councillor Lane. This has been raised by one of your colleagues actually already with me in the last couple of weeks, and I'm not sure if Andy can add anything to that, but it does, I agree with you, it's the line of trees now rather than a hedge.
Yes, I'm aware of that particular case. It's been a long-standing one, but no, I mean, we would, obviously, we're always willing to meet and discuss these things with landowners, but obviously we're operating within a finite budget and we've a lot of assets of our own to maintain within that budget, so it's not easy to help with specific physical measures or anything for things that are on other people's land. However, through advice or trying to work with them in other ways, there's maybe some things we can do to help, but we would look at it on a case-by-case basis again.
Just a supplementary, is there any way that we are aware of funding? I think that the last time we met with the landowner, it was £70,000 to do it. Well, that was 3-4 years ago, so we'll probably be up to about £80,000 or £90,000. And what's happening, every year this isn't done, the costs obviously going up. There must be some sort of lottery funding or something, I don't know, that we could maybe point the landowner in to help finance this.
I'm not familiar with any funding, but perhaps Andy. I've just checked Barbara. Sorry, Councillor Parrott, followed by Councillor Dugan.
Thank you, Convener. We are indeed, as a council, very fortunate that we have so many engaged volunteers helping us with this work, and we must do all we can to encourage them. I'm particularly pleased, as you might imagine, with the work done recently on the Perth Lade, which is fantastic. Can I ask, though, that or express the hope that we continue to do all that we can in a difficult financial situation to provide the resources that support that volunteer effort, as I always believe that volunteers need direction and targeting sometimes, and we would be falling down as a council if we did not provide and resource the support those groups need. Going on from that, I'm aware in other areas that you can use the value of volunteer labour when you're seeking grant funding as a match funding to lever in more money. And I hope that the council or the groups that do this work for us are aware of that ability to use the value of the effort they put in to lever in more funds. And I just wonder whether we've been able to use that, whether we can use it, and whether that might actually lever even more out of the fine efforts that our volunteers make. Thanks.
Thank you. I agree with your first point, and perhaps Andy can specifically answer your second point.
Yes, in-kind contributions are very much part of any funding application, so there is a value attributed to all the time that volunteers put into projects, and that counts against the overall total that the community groups are looking for, and that's quite a frequently used calculation. Yeah.
Councillor Dugan, followed by Councillor Barnacle.
Thank you, Convener. First, a very simple question is to the remaining funds in the £50,000 that was allocated to improvements in the Lade. How much of that's been consumed and how much of that is left?
Barbara, Andy, you could maybe answer that specific question.
I don't have the specific numbers with me, but I'm pretty sure most of that money's now been spent.
Okay, that's fine.
Could we get that to you after the meeting?
Most is fine for me. Thank you, Convener. It's nearly all gone. That's fine. And yeah, this is a very encouraging report. And I think Andy's indication, I think it was £30,000. He equated the level of community capacity that's been expended in these projects, which puts the monetary value on top of every other kind of value that it delivers. And I think it'll be helpful for volunteers to realise the effect that they're having, both financial and in terms of improving their communities. And it's happening, as Councillor Robertson says, right across Perth and Kinross to very good effect. Where it comes unstuck, of course, Convener, is in areas that aren't owned by the council, but yet are very well utilised areas of public space. And I know I've certainly had dealings in my ward, and I'm certain that my colleagues in this committee and elsewhere will have dealings with, I don't want to get in trouble, so let's say less than attentive factors who have been appointed by house builders to look after land in perpetuity and subsequently don't. And that leads to real problems. And I think hopefully in time, I wonder rather if in time we can take a similarly measured but flexible approach to these areas too, where there are, as there are in my ward, very isolated and relatively inexpensive problems to resolve, but which we blanket won't do just now, for the very competent reason of being it's not our land and we don't have any responsibility to fix it, but that doesn't make it any less of an impediment to the people that try to use these spaces daily.
I agree with you entirely, Councillor Dugan, and Councillor Bailey and I have a few of these issues in our own ward, which we talk about regularly, and I agree with everything you say.
Well, it was actually a question that can officers have a look at whether or not we can apply a similar level of flexibility up to, I assume, very carefully controlled costs to make things better, even though it's not a responsibility so to do.
Andy?
Yes, well, we've obviously got the Community Environmental Challenge Fund that's available to community groups who can improve the local environment in an area, and if it's on somebody else's land, as long as they have an agreement with that landowner and there's a long-term maintenance regime in place, they can still apply for that funding. So we do try and encourage improvements on land that isn't necessarily our own. Also on core paths, for example, most of which we don't own, there's a lot of work done with landowners to try and make sure that they keep these open. We have powers to insist that they do if they don't at the end of the day, but we do try and get path groups to go in, and we'll pump prime the landowner and make sure that they're happy that we're going in and doing some maintenance on their behalf. So we do try and work with private landowners as well where appropriate.
Councillor Barnacle, followed by Councillor Simpson.
Thanks, Convener. It comes down sometimes to money that kickstarts things as well. I mean, that 50,000 that was allocated for the Perth Lade has been a real success story in delivering real improvements, and I'm very pleased about that. But you acknowledge that the council has reduced the capacity to maintain the path network to the standard that users would like in the report. And I think what I would again like to know is what sort of extra money would be helpful in trying to get more paths groups up and running. You say you've got 17 paths groups. I only know of one in Kinross-shire, unless you include the Tracks Committee in that, which does do a lot of very good work. And I've struggled to get community councils to develop path groups locally. I just wonder if you would acknowledge that if you got a little bit of extra funding, it would assist that. And the other question is, you mentioned a management plan for Rumbling Bridge. I presume that's the Rumbling Bridge in Kinross-shire. I had a tour, not this last summer, the summer before, around that area, which is desperately needing improvements through a management plan, but I've had no feedback as to proposals, although I know Tracks are working on a new bridge project there. But I've got several ideas that could help to improve that situation at Rumbling Bridge, but I've had no feedback since the tour we did.
Thank you, Councillor Barnacle. Are you okay with that, Andy? I'm very conscious that we got quite into very specific detail about a ward issue. And would you be comfortable, Councillor Barnacle, if we carried that question to private and Andy can make himself available to you after the meeting for that one? Are you comfortable with that? Yeah. Thank you.
That's fine. Do you want me to answer that?
Just the first question, please.
About the maintenance resources and stuff? Yeah, again, we use the resources we've got. So part of the idea is that if path groups want to, say, put in some drainage or repair the surfacing, if we've got planned maintenance monies available, then we would help with those path repairs. So obviously the amount of resource we've got will affect the number of repairs that we can work with community groups. So, and it just depends what sort of works are required to the paths and what works groups are prepared to do as well. Some groups are really far advanced. They've had training on using machinery and stuff like that out on the path network. Others are just keen to report in litter or some damage or clean signs and that type of thing. So it's very variable, but our whole thrust of this is that we work directly with communities to try and get them to do more on their own sites with our support. So whatever resource we have, we will try and use it in that way.
Thank you. I think last question to Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Convener. I think it's good to see there's unanimity across the chamber that our admiration for this report, and indeed for, I think, for Mr. Clegg, who gave the report. He's a long-standing and certain indeed his interaction with me, a long-suffering officer, and he deals with a number of very complex things very well. I've no wish to make you blush too much, Andy, but it's showing up well on the screen. My question, though, to stray back to my question, Convener, was relating to 1.1 on the first page of the report, where it mentions the well-being of residents. And I wonder if it was possible to quantify in some way both the mental and the physical health benefits to people who do volunteer. This might be best done, perhaps we could have some case studies, because we want as much participation as possible. And there is no doubt that people's physical well-being would be increased by getting out and about and helping with these things, and anything we could do to demonstrate that might be helpful. So I think perhaps a case study would be the least onerous way of doing that.
I thought for a minute you were going to suggest a lawnmower attached to a bicycle there, Councillor Simpson. Is there anything you can comment on that, please, Andy?
Yes, I mean, we do try to capture the sort of consultation and community engagement work we do, so that's certainly an aspect of it we could look at. I mean, we have done reports on that type of thing before, Woodlands to Wellbeing project that we did, and that type of thing, so there's certainly no problem doing that. We'd like to share that sort of information with people.
Thank you. I'm very conscious that a lot of the questions came with comments at the start of them. Are there any other comments on the report? Councillor Dugan.
Yeah, just very quickly, just to make reference and record my thanks to the Greenspace officers that Mr. Clegg referred to on the litter picks that I've been on. It's very motivational, very well equipped, very knowledgeable, and gets people onto the task and gets people delivering. And over and above that, the £50,000 that has been, as we now know, almost completely exhausted on the Lade has had a tremendously transformative effect on that jewel of Perth, and I would encourage officers and members of the council and public alike to take a walk up, even if it's just from the Crieff Road up to the A9, and you'll see a tremendous difference in what you probably maybe think is there. You'll also maybe be lucky enough to bump into some of the Tulloch Primary School's painted stones. If you're very lucky, you'll get our spring flowers and our wildflowers, and if you're exceptionally lucky, you'll catch sight of our kingfisher.
Thank you, Councillor Dugan. Councillor Simpson, I cycled some of that way last week, and actually, Councillor Dugan, I was at the front. I was redder than he was, but I was very much at the front.
That wasn't an electric bike.
No, and that wasn't an electric bike. I should have moved the report before comments. I apologise. Can I move the report? Do we agree the report? Thank you very much. Right, moving on to item 6 on our agenda. This is a very complex report on the draft air quality action plan for Crieff, and an introduction will be given to us by Kirsty Stephen. Thank you, Kirsty.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, councillors. Levels of traffic pollution within the Crieff Main Street corridor have failed national objectives. As a result, we have to implement an air quality action plan. The draft action plan, created by Perth and Kinross Council and in collaboration with TACTRAN and Transport Scotland, includes short, medium and long-term measures to try and address these pollution issues. Agreement is now sought from members to progress the action plan by seeking further consultation with all relevant external stakeholders. That's the public, be it residents, businesses, community councils, and so on. The results of this consultation will further inform the content of this action plan prior to resubmission to committee for final approval at the beginning of 2019. Okay. I'm happy to take any questions in relation to the action plan.
Thank you very much. So Donaldson first.
Thank you. First of all, can I say I think this is quite an impressive piece of work. It's also quite complex and technical. I suspect I'm going to have a bit more background reading to do. There are 2 or 3 questions I would like to ask you. There are 1 or 2 surprises as well it does seem to me, I was quite surprised that buses, and correct me if I'm wrong, are a fairly low contributing factor. They're not a major issue on this. I think the second one is that the problem in Crieff, again, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not just between the Town Hall and the West High Street corner with Comrie Street. It actually goes quite a bit up the East High Street to almost Strathern Terrace. Just if you could confirm on that.
Yes.
That is...
On your first point, yes, I think there's always been an impression that buses were quite a contributor to pollution levels. Our consultants undertook what we describe as source apportionment. So they look at what's travelling through the corridor, they identify the emission levels, and then they apportion it to all the different sources. So it was identified that primarily a lot of the pollution through the congestion is from HGVs and cars, as opposed to buses or light good vehicles. So yes, that has been confirmed. In terms of the actual area which is affected by the air quality management area, yes, it does go from East High Street right down West High Street. Because there's a lot of congestion at times, because it's a narrow street and there's high buildings on either side, it's creating this canyon effect, and that includes up East High Street there, so it's trapping the air pollution and creating these higher levels.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks, thank you, Convener. Just one or two specific questions. One point that's mentioned is on page 71. However, recent monitoring results indicate a general downward trend in levels of both nitrogen dioxide and particulate material to 10 micrometers. Can I just ask, how pronounced has that trend been, and is it greater than the national average? Because there's obviously the introduction of electric vehicles. And also, do we take into account the even more smaller particulate material of 2.5 micrometers?
Okay. First of all, I would stress that although we do have failures, they are marginal. We don't have huge pollution problems. We do have a pollution problem, though, that we need to action. In terms of the downward trend, it is a national downward trend simply because of the increase in cleaner vehicles generally. We discussed this with our air quality consultants who suggested that, there'll be significant reductions probably in around about 10 years' time. But in between times, we have to action the situation that we have in front of us. PM 2.5s are now getting measured in Crieff through our real-time monitor. It's 24/7 monitor, but we don't have sufficient results as yet to make comment on. We can't ratify that data as yet, but it is being accrued at the moment.
Final question. I'm glad that is the case. I'd like to make one or two observations after the questions are over. Page 73, 2.9, and this is actually quite important. It's not just in relation to this specific issue, but it states, following agreement with Transport Scotland, I think this may have been one of the reasons why the report got slightly held up, and the Council, an extensive update of the existing Crieff traffic model is to be undertaken. Can I ask on that, when the timelines, and is this model not just going to cover the High Street, but a large chunk of Crieff? Because that's implications for the likes of Broik Road and such.
Yes, certainly. We had a lot of negotiation with Transport Scotland because it's a trunk road to try and just seek as much data as we possibly could about the movements in and around Crieff in relation to parking, junctions, traffic management in general. So we bid to the Scottish Government to get funding to do all that work, and we were successful in getting £112,000 to do so. So it's going to be a three-stage process in updating the traffic model. First of all, we undertake surveys and gather all the necessary data. That's through spotters on the street, ANPR cameras and video footage as well. That has now been done. The second stage is then to go on and create the actual model that can be challenged. And what we will look to do from that information is identify certain scenarios that we think would have a positive impact on air quality. So that might be, for example, looking at changing on traffic light sequencing. It might be moving pedestrian crossings. It might be changing junction priorities. And we can actually, our transport colleagues can input that into the model, and then we look at what the impact will be air quality wise. How much will it actually improve the air quality? So it's 3-stage: gather the data, create the model, and then challenge it with the different scenarios and how that will improve air quality or not.
Very grateful to you, and I do have one or two brief observations.
I'm happy to take a question from you later on after some other people have had a chance, if you want another. Councillor Robertson, I think, followed by Councillor McCall.
Thanks, Convener. I have to say, I read this report and I actually found it really disappointing. In as much as we all know the traffic situation in Crieff and how bad it can be. And when I read it, I thought, if we're doing all this work into an air quality report, there'll be really good proposals coming out from it that will give encouragement to the people who live and work in the high street in Crieff and have to put up with the pollution. But it immediately discounts things like a bypass, banning HGVs, which I'd have thought was the first starting point. I agree that an up-to-date traffic model will be good, but unless we've got somewhere to divert the traffic from, then we're not really going to do much to solve this problem. My question is, given we go through this this consultation process to bring this plan to fruition, and that takes maybe a year to 2 years, what will the position be 2 years hence? Will the air quality be much better if we've got this this plan in place, or will, at the end of the day, will we still be saying to ourselves, why don't we try and plan to reroute some of this HGV traffic and through traffic out of the high street in Crieff?
Okay. The plan is a gradual refinement of the measures that we put in front of us. So when the steering group was created, which included internal stakeholders, TACTRAN and Transport Scotland, all the possible measures that we thought were appropriate went on the table. Some have been retained in the draft document and some have been not removed because they can all go back on the table during the external consultation, but were perhaps initially removed from a cost-benefit point of view. In relation to a bypass, that can still come back on the table. It's not a situation that we've totally distanced ourselves from. It's simply that we needed quicker, faster measures that were more cost-effective to be retained at this point in time. It may well, after the external consultation, come back in as a point for further discussion.
Okay, well, that's actually, you've slightly given me some encouragement, because it just seemed like, to me, shuffling the deck chairs in the deck of the Titanic, you know. It needs some sort of dramatic action to cut the traffic levels in the centre of Crieff, or if we don't do that, we're not going to get much further forward.
I think Barbara wants to make a comment or an answer some of your questions.
No, thank you for that, Convener, and thank you for your question, Councillor Robertson. Clearly, there are 36, sort of potential actions within the action plan. Some of them will be, sort of marginal differences, but as Kirsty's already pointed out, the levels of, sort of actual pollution within Crieff are marginal anyway. I think, sort of what Kirsty's quite rightly identified is that, sort of things aren't off the table. Some of them, sort of are longer term, and some of them aren't necessarily in our gift, sort of such as the bypass. But that's the reason for the wide external consultation that we will need to do with, sort of organisations such as Transport Scotland, However, you know, sort of I can almost hear, you know, sort of the businesses in Crieff going, hold on a minute, if you're going to bypass Crieff, you know, sort of where are all our visitors going to come from as well? So there will always be, you know, sort of completely different arguments for that. And that's the important bit of doing the local consultation as well.
Thank you. Next up was Councillor McCall, followed by Councillor Dugan.
I have to say, I think Mrs. Renton has just come in and answered my question. I was actually concerned about the air quality versus traffic being in isolation, and how much does the economy of Crieff, and considering it is the high street, it's the main drive within Crieff at the moment, how much does that actually play in comparison to the traffic air pollution side? It was just to try and get a balance, but it might already have been answered, but I'll put it out there anyway.
And that's certainly something that we're really keen to get opinion on from local businesses. We will hold workshops to ensure that we're clearly getting the message across of how much their, you know, opinion matters, and we need feedback for them to inform the final draft. So yes, until we go out to external consultation, I think it's difficult to comment at this stage.
Okay, could I possibly indulge being kept up to date on how that process is going?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Dugan?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I mean, I think it is easy to be frustrated when you read this paper in terms of the lack of, you know, chunky, big changes that this is, you know, will deliver in the short term. But I think you have to see that through the realities that officers are working in. You have to actually, and I think this paper sets out very well, the very careful and incremental way that you have to analyse what's happening where, why and by whom, and at what times. You know, it's really complicated. And I think we can probably do a lot, as the report sets out, to make improvements. I think it is a wee bit unfortunate, although again I say I understand the reasons why. It seems to me that in paragraph 1.1.2 on page 71, it's a lot of talk about deciding things and measuring things and such. But you know, I take on board why that is. I've got two questions, Convener. I wonder if Kirsty might be able to answer my concern that people in general are really very, very too much complacent about the effect of air quality of this standard, the air quality this poor, the effect on health. And the other question, Convener, is on page 74, where it says at the bottom of paragraph 2.10 that the do-nothing option is also under consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Dugan. Kirsty, could you answer
Certainly.
both those,
Sorry,
please?
I didn't hear the second part of that question. Apologies.
No, it's okay. The second question was on paragraph 2.10, where it says that the do-nothing option will also be considered. That came as quite a shock.
Okay. If I could answer that first, please. So the do-nothing scenario relates to what we were discussing before with Councillor Donaldson and, you know, the cleaner vehicles emerging. And what difference will it make if we don't actually do anything going forward? So from a prediction point of view and modelling emissions. So that's why we always want to have a look at that. What we don't want to do is spend a lot of money and make a lot of changes without knowing what the improvements might be without doing nothing. And in relation to the health aspect side of things, yeah, I think that's actually a really important point. We undertook on-street engagement, or sorry, I should say we didn't. Planning Aid Scotland, in conjunction with SEPA, undertook some on-street engagement a couple of weeks ago with members of the public. They were actually at the farmers' market to just try and gather, as a precursor to the external consultation, what people's feelings were about Crieff generally, a holistic point of view, and then bring in the thoughts about air quality. And the majority of people didn't recognise there was an air quality problem. They see it as a rural town, and they relate air quality problems with big cities. So that's something from an educational point of view and an engagement point of view that we will need to deal with, I think.
In the absence of any more questions, I'll move the report. And do we have any comments? Councillor Donaldson first, then Councillor McCall.
Okay. I do stress I think we do need further measurements on health grounds and further evidence on smaller particulate matter on 2.5 micrometers, because there's evidence to suggest these can be perhaps the most damaging factors, and that evidence isn't there. I think it's important on this report that at this stage, it is being put out to consultation, and a whole number of individuals and organisations have got to participate in that. It may be that, and I am impressed by the report because I think it's honest, I think it's technical, it doesn't set out some grand vision. I know Councillor Robertson believes that a bypass could well be the real option. The problem there is, by the time you've built that bypass, probably not before 2025, not just the cost, but there's real environmental considerations to be taken into account, added to which you've got the danger of turning Crieff into a bypass town, with enormous consequences for local residents and businesses. What's been put forward here are a whole range of incremental measures. I've got question marks about how you enforce on idling. I think parking, how do you do that? But there's the question of traffic flow. It does strike me one of the key pinch points is indeed West High Street and Comrie Street. It may even be that some of the measures that have to be put in place and must be put in place to protect people's health and well-being will not be put in place on a permanent basis. It may be over 5-10 years that you can change the position again, especially if something like 20% of the UK vehicle fleet moves to being all electric or hybrid, and that's very feasible on the basis, certainly of some broker research, the likes of UBS, I seem to recall. But I think it is significant, but we've got to hear back. We take the decision on this in, I would imagine, late January, early February. I would say, in terms of implementation, one other factor that's got to be taken into account is that there will be, even though it's going to be at the other end of town, and we need to minimise that disruption, there's going to be significant disruption in Crieff over the next year because of the gas pipe works. And I think that's a factor that will have to be taken into account. That's.
Thank you. Councillor McCall?
Thank you very much. My comment is quite short. It's basically just to say, first of all, I thank you for the report. I think it is comprehensive. I was hoping for more, a solution, as I think many of the residents in Crieff will be doing so. And I look forward to the next stage. I think it's important we get on to the next stage. We're really looking at getting the information out to the community as to what it is. It isn't actually maybe necessarily as bad as people may have the perception that it is, as far as the air pollution is concerned. So I thank you for the report. Hopefully we can get on a speedy to the next level and get the information that we have brought together out to the people in Crieff and let them understand what the position actually is. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McCall. And Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Convener. I too have a quick observation. I think the quickest, simplest and cheapest way to improve air quality would be to have an active travel strategy promoted, as we mentioned in the BMIP. And I hope that as part of this, we could have some action on active travel. I sometimes think that calling these plans action plans is a bit of a misnomer. I would miss the action out myself. But the quickest and easiest way for the people of Crieff is to stop making short car journeys and to consider buses, walking, or dare I say, some other method of transport.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. I think you've left me speechless. Can I ask the committee to agree this report based on the conclusion and recommendations in item 3? Thank you. Right, item 7 on our agenda is a regular report on the winter maintenance, and Stuart is here to talk to us. Sorry, I didn't recognise you there, Stuart. I thought you'd disappeared. That's you. Yeah. Thank you, Stuart. Are you happy to introduce this?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, we've brought forward the policy and level of service for winter, as we do annually. After a severe winter last year, which we managed to deal with fairly well, there are no huge changes to the proposals for this forthcoming winter. We are extending the night shift service that would deliver by 2 additional night shift routes for the winter. There was an issue with the brine solution that we were using in some of the more suburban areas with a lower footfall last winter, so we're looking at using that in the lead in, the lead out when it's less severe weather, and reverting to salt when in the main period of winter. And other than that, there are no real significant changes to the policy. We are buying more push-along barrows to offer out to the community this year, which was quite successful last year, and there's a bit going up on the website offering that service to volunteers to do sections of Footway for us. And other than that, the level of service will be broadly similar to last year.
Is that you done? Stuart's open for questions. Councillor Barnacle first.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, must have been a difficult winter, Stuart, in some respects. We had periods of severe weather from time to time. Paragraph 224 refers to the volunteer arrangements with farmers to assist with snow clearance. But I note that the number of farmers is down on previous years, and that you only add farmers from areas where there's presently little coverage. I mean, is there any reason why there's a reduction? I mean, are we not promoting the scheme enough, or has there been any change on that? That's the first question. And the second one is on the Appendix 2A. I know the routes are examples, but I think the A911 is a Category 1A route. It's probably just that you've not mentioned it. And the other one on Appendix 2B, when we're looking at footways, where I live, Crookerdevon, there was virtually no footpath clearance during the winter, and it's not mentioned there. It's a bigger village than Pear Mill, for example, which is mentioned. Just wonder if it is included, actually.
Stuart, can you answer that?
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Barnacle. Yeah, we are down on the number of self-help farmers over the last few years. We have no real reason for that. We don't know if it's a generational thing where younger farmers are less inclined to participate in the scheme. We don't know if that's the reason. But we are down on numbers. We have 29 farmers who volunteered to help us on a paid basis as well. That number stayed broadly the same over the period, although the number of voluntary farmers are down. In terms of the footways, Crookerdevon is, I'm fairly certain Crookerdevon is a Category 2 route footway, but I'll double check and get back to you on that basis. And the other one was, sorry.
I think it's just that the A911 wasn't mentioned. It's just that it's example routes on the table.
That's right, yeah, they're just examples, but the A911 is a Category 1 route, yeah.
I think Barbara wants to make a couple of comments on that.
It's just one. I wonder, Stuart, if we could just pick up through your professional association, Scots, about whether the reduction in number of farmers helping in rural areas is a national position.
Yes, we can do that. There is a Scots winter subgroup, so I can speak to other colleagues and find out if they're suffering, experience the same situation. Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you. I think, if I saw the hands right, Mr. Councillor Williamson had a question. Was that correct?
Correct, yeah. Thank you, Convener. It's regarding the pedestrian gritters. You say in the reports in 2.18 there's 14 of them gone out. I was just wondering after the winter how many of them are actually still working?
don't have feedback. I know that 2 broke through the course of the winter. We replaced both of them. I haven't had any feedback that any further ones have broken. We are about to contact all the people who issued out the gritters to get feedback from them to see if they're wanting to continue on the scheme, and also the ones that we never managed to issue a hand gritter out to, will be contacting them to see if they're still interested as well.
With regard to the gritters then, I anticipate that if you have a gritter, you're only going to be doing about, what, 100, 200 yards of footpath with a gritter before you're going to need more salt. So with your policy around your grit bins, how does that match with the use of these salt spreaders? Or are they given bags of salt to spread the salt along the footpaths?
Yeah, what we do is for each person that's got a push-lung barrel, we provide them with sandbag size full of salt, because the hopper takes approximately the same amount that we put in a sandbag. So we've issued pallets or piles to individuals of 20 sandbags, and they'll put the sandbags worth of salt into the gritter, do the route, come back, put another one in, and go and do another section.
Doesn't that therefore make it very expensive? Because loose salt's obviously more expensive than, or a lot cheaper, should I say, than bag salt, isn't it, at the end of the day? So doesn't it make it an expensive way to grit your footpaths?
It's cheaper than doing it ourselves, but putting salt into a sandbag is more expensive than just delivering it in a pile. However, delivering it in a pile, they'd have to sit it in their garden, or they'd have to put it in some other place. It would need to be covered. So in terms of doing that, would be more of a challenge. We fill the sandbags with salt on using night shift drivers when there's no gritting to be done. So we utilise their resource to do that, so they're available for people.
Okay, so with regard to your policy around your grit bins and the replenishment of those grit bins, and I take it the drivers who are going out at night should be therefore replenishing the grit bins as well then, would that be a correct assumption?
They can do that as well, yes. And they did do it last winter on the few nights that they didn't have to do a winter treatment of the road network themselves, yeah. They did do it last year, yes. Alongside other crews that do it throughout the day as well.
And just one final point. You mentioned you did a feedback. There doesn't seem to be very much mention of what the community mentioned about what their priorities are, or community feedback. Did you get any feedback from the communities, and how did that influence the writing of this report?
In terms of community council feedback, we received feedback from 7 community councils as a result of our letter in April. A number of them just thanked us for the work we did. Others mentioned specific roads that they felt should have been treated earlier and perhaps weren't. And we'll look at that in the run-up to this coming winter.
Has that influenced anything within that report, that feedback? Has it changed anything with the way the report's been written?
In relation to the brine, yes, because we received feedback that the brine wasn't very effective in the suburban areas, which we had picked up ourselves, but it has resulted in us only going to use brine in the lead-in and lead-out milder periods, and in the main period we'll revert to rock salt again for these treatments.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson, did I see you with your hand up?
A couple of things. With regard to pavements in sort of villages and small towns, it's always difficult for us to get these covered, especially like children trying to walk to school and stuff. And I wondered if we ever thought about having a sort of partnership arrangement with golf clubs in these villages, because when it's snowing, the greenkeeping staff are sitting in the hut doing nothing. And they've got little tractors, well, by and large they are. They've got little tractors and things that are ideal for the sort of work that is involved in gritting and clearing pavements. That was the first question. And the second question was, and this isn't really a question, but I noticed last year, I thought, when it was really, really bad in the winter and we had a lot of blocked roads, especially in Kinrossshire, I thought the road staff did really, really well in both keeping local councillors informed of what was happening, when the road was likely to get opened, and what work was being done to actually open the road, because we were getting phone calls from residents saying we're still trapped in their house, we can't get out, when is it likely to happen? And we were getting regular updates, and I thought that was really, really helpful. And if that could be a sort of regular thing...
Can we get to the question, Councillor Robertson?
I just asked him if that could be a regular thing in future, when roads are actually blocked, if local councillors can be just given a note of what is happening to opening the road and when it's likely to be opened, so we can inform our constituents.
I think there was two questions there, one regarding greenkeepers, which I detected a very sharp intake of breath.
Okay.
One of your colleagues a few places down. Could you answer both of those questions, please?
Yes, we'll have sought to engage with golf courses and greenkeepers. Councillor Williamson's been involved in that in the north area. Very often. There is a cost involved in it, one in getting kit to put on the greenkeepers' equipment, which we would be happy to do, to work with them to do that. There then becomes an operational cost in running it, which all adds into the winter cost to do, that we've got. So that it's not a free cost. There is cost in doing it, and there are other logistical issues that Councillor Williamson might want to comment on. I don't know, but we have looked at doing it, and we haven't managed to get it in place in reality.
Councillor Williamson, do you want
first point to pick up on is I don't think any greenkeeper would thank you for your comment that greenkeepers are sat in the shed doing nothing for the winter, because no, they don't sit in the shed doing nothing for the winter. They are busy people, okay? With regard to, and I'm sure your constituents who are greenkeepers will be pleased to hear that comment you've just made. Second point is some of the equipment that greenkeepers actually operate on isn't potentially four-wheel drive. It's got grassland tyres on it, and Stuart is quite correct. The cost of actually swapping that kit across to go around in and using winter will be probably prohibitively high. Doesn't mean to say it can't be done, it's just that some of the kit that can't be done. Also, there's the additional thing about the corrosion on some of the kit with regard to the salts. It just eats away at some of their kit. So there are a few prohibitive things, but yes, I do slightly agree with you, but I am slightly out about your comments about greenkeepers being lazy in winter.
Thank you. I think Barbara wants to make a comment on that as well.
No, it wasn't. I'm going to move away from greenkeeping. I think not renowned for my inhabitation of the golf course. So it was just to say thank you, Councillor Robertson, in terms of the feedback in relation to the communications. Is something that we work very closely with our colleagues within the comms team, and the use of social media in particular, for keeping residents informed, however, at times, if the crews are out and busy, it's about just trying to make sure that they're doing their job, and we're in the centre trying to get that information out, but we will continue to try to do that as best as we can. I think I would like also to pay tribute. There was a lot of comment at the time about, a pregnant woman who was stuck, and the police took a lot of credit and the NHS took a lot of credit. She wouldn't have got out to go to hospital but for the work of the Roads Maintenance Partnership in clearing the way, and I think that that's important to reflect that here as well.
Thank you, Barbara. Councillor Bailey, followed by Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. As you know, Convener, grit bins are probably my number 2 pet topic after broadband equality. But jokes aside, the reason for that is I think that in both cases this council has a challenge around the historical inequality in the distribution of those resources. And with grit bins, I observe that if I stand in one of our newer housing estates, I can stand by a grit bin, look to the right and see the next one, look to the left and see the next one. There is perhaps over-provision in the newer build areas, and conversely under-provision in the areas that were built before the times when local authorities had to cut back on a lot of the winter maintenance. That leads me into my question. On page 172 of the report, just the end of paragraph 2.2.2, it states there grit bins are filled prior to the onset of winter. In 2017 season, anecdotal evidence suggests that didn't happen throughout, certainly my ward, the Castle-Gowrie. And it leads me to my specific question, which is, does this council actually have mapping, and does the council know where all of these grit bins are located in order that they can fill them and not just fill them, but service them. So a large number have litter in them, a large number of them have caked material in them, meaning the material's unworkable. Thank you.
Stuart?
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Yes, we don't have mapping for them, but we'll have lists for all the settlements and all the grip bins that we'll have. What we do prior to the onset of winter is we put crews out with the lists, and they take a note of the condition of the grip bin and or the fillet. If they discover that it's in a condition it can't be filled, then we will look to replace it prior to onset of winter and get it filled. So we don't have mapping, but we do have lists of them, yes.
Quick follow-up, if I may. So if myself and ward colleagues give you an inventory of the ones that have a problem with litter or with caking of the material, that's something you can address ahead of the onset of winter, is it, Stuart?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Councillor Duff, followed by Councillor Ling.
Thank you, Convener. My question is with regard to page 176, the table, financial table there. It shows the outturn costs for, I think it's a 14-year period. And by and large, it tends to follow a kind of inflationary increase, with the exception of 2 or 3 years within it, 2009, 10, 10, 11, and again last year, 17, 18, where the costs were over £5 million, substantially above the budget figure. I just wonder if Mr Dahl could comment as to the reason for that.
Yeah, they're wholly down to the severity of the winter. That it is, and it's just it's the operational cost to providing that service.
I think Barbara wanted to comment as well on that.
Yeah, as the report indicates, Councillor Duff, that last winter was the third worst, sort of in 13 years, and those other 2 years where the figures are above 5 million were the other 2 years that were significantly bad. Thankfully that's what the council has reserves for. And any underspend goes back into into reserves, and then any overspends are paid through for reserves, so it doesn't have any impact on the overall level of service for the rest of housing and environment.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Next up is Councillor Ling, followed by Councillor Donaldson.
I don't think Councillor Robertson should worry. I incur more wrath from greenkeepers when I'm playing the game than he will there. A work creation scheme, in fact. I was interested, I thought it was an incongruous statement of volunteers being paid. I thought a volunteer would be doing something voluntary rather than being paid. So to hear farmers being volunteer farmers being paid, I just thought it was incongruous. I think just the lack of farmers could be that farms are growing in size as tenant farmers come out of it and they're taken over by estates. I know in my own area that where there was 12 tenant farmers, there's now 1 super farm. So that could be a possibility across there. My question is, Convener, relating about winter road maintenance. A year ago, exactly a year ago, there was a new policy launched about that included first-time permanent repairs that was going to start in October last year.
I can probably stop you there, Councillor Ling. I know where you want to go with this. If this is about potholes, we're discussing winter maintenance.
No. Well, this is about winter maintenance.
Okay. If
you'd let me go through, and obviously I've fitted it into the correct paper and the correct question. You're right about the question, though. So, if I can get the thread back. Yeah, so you launched the policy, first-time permanent repairs, but it was meant to be implemented in October. It wasn't implemented over the winter period, possibly because of training issues and possibly because of manpower issues, because people were needed to clean the roads. So during the summer months, we've still only managed to achieve about 20% was the last figures I had of first-time permanent repairs, which is a lot less, as I'm sure you'll agree, than was attended. My question is, and that's been in the best time for doing first-time permanent repairs, so we're still doing a lot like 80% temporary repairs. As we move into winter and we take men to do this, will this impact on the ability to do first-time permanent repairs?
Stuart?
We've currently got external contractors primed to come in and assist us do first-time permanent repairs as and when we have to take our own crews off to do winter. So we're anticipating that won't impact significantly on as a result of the winter.
Do you think it will impact by increasing it to a higher level by bringing these other people in? And Convener, could I possibly ask if Stuart could provide me monthly as well of what the percentage of first-time permanent repairs are.
Stuart may want to correct me on this, but I understand the software system that's used is we're trying to do something with it that it isn't designed to do, and I think we're still having some maintenance work done on that software, so I suspect that might not be possible at the moment. Is that correct, Stuart?
Yes, the software system that we do, we get reports out, and it wasn't designed to get a monthly report because of the amount of work in progress that's ongoing. So we're having to do work with the figures it prints out. It gives us to get an accurate result. So at this moment in time, it's quite a challenge to do that on a monthly basis.
Supplementary, it begs the question how you could launch a policy a year ago, and a year down the line we still don't have the equipment to operate, to get the figures out of it. Is the GPS part of that policy being enacted?
Councillor Ling, I think we are very much getting into a matter that's not on this agenda, and happy to take those questions when that paper comes to the future committee. There was a question about volunteers. I think if I understand this correctly, I think some farmers do this. We pay them to do it, and we pay them to do our network. Yeah. But I think also some volunteer, we give them free equipment. Is that right?
Yeah.
And they can do our network and some of their own.
Yeah, all farmers that volunteer are given a plough. They then do a section of the public road network free of charge. All of them do that. They can then use that plough to do their own farm tracks if they want. 29 of the farmers who are volunteers also have agreed that in times of severe weather they will come out and work for us on other parts of the public road network for an hourly rate. So that's where we have paid volunteers, yeah.
Last but by no means least, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Convener. Grit bins, and following up on Councillor Bailey's comments, I just want to make ask one or two questions. It's under 2.22. We have 1,300 grit bins across Perth and Kinross. That works out at an average of just over 100 per ward. I suspect I've got my lists, but Strathern may be somewhat below that. But it's a policy. It reads here, therefore, any request for additional grit bins will require to be offset by relocating another grit bin. Just how rigid is that policy, or can it be relaxed in exceptional circumstances?
I don't know what the exceptional circumstances would be, but we are sticking to that at this moment in time, purely because we can't service any additional grit bins getting put out on the network.
I can understand, obviously, capacity restrictions. The place I'm thinking in particular of was Potenzie Street in Crieff, which arose last year. But there's a more general point. It just seems so rigid that we're saying, no, if you want a new grit bin, you can't have it. And the capital cost is pretty minor. I think there should be at least a greater degree of flexibility in the policy.
In terms of the capital cost, it is quite a small value. However, the resource implications and the cost operationally of refilling these additional grit bins is quite significant, and that's why we've had to stem the additional grit bins going on the network and aim to relocate others rather than put new ones out. We're happy to look at anything that councillors come up with in terms of exceptional circumstances that they would consider would need to put something out, but I'm not aware of what these exceptional circumstances would be at this moment in time.
That's useful to hear. So there might be some degree of flexibility. I understand your position on filling them up and the staff time that's involved, but it's not 100% rigid.
It's not 100% rigid, but I don't know what the exceptional circumstances might be, no.
I think Barbara's going to give you some more information on that, Councillor Donald.
No, I don't think it's any more information. I think that, sort of the way that we presented the winter policy this year was to show the changes that we've made from the last policy that was approved last year. The information in terms of the grit bins, sort of because it's not in italic, means that it's exactly the same policy as it has been for a number of years. So that what we're saying is that, you know, sort of where grit bins are provided, they're generally, as the paragraph says, on steep gradients, tight bends and steps, or where there is a specific community need. So at that point, I think that we're saying, you know, sort of it is always, that's the same as it always has been. It's not an introduction of inflexibility. But what I think Stuart's reflecting is that if there is a community need, you know, sort of, but it might mean that we are allocating or reallocating bins from within your area, but we don't have a difficulty with that. But there is a limited number in terms of the resources we have available in terms of staff time to be able to do that.
Okay, as there are no other questions, I'm going to move the report. And are there now any comments on the report? I think Councillor Simpson was first, followed by...
Thank you, Convener. It's a very good report, and interesting to see that it takes a roads engineer to master the microphone. I made a note of that. I think two things I would say. One, we need to encourage a little bit of self-reliance. I'm sure that Councillor Reid's better qualified than me to comment on how good it is for our cardiovascular health to do a little bit of light snow clearing. And I think if we could get a bit of volunteers helping, that's probably better than people pinching stuff out the grit bin, which I see that happening regularly, people taking containers and using it for themselves. And the other point we make is understand that Wicks and other retailers available actually sell grit and salt, and you can buy your own to do your path and your driveway. But I think I would hope that we could help to promote a little bit of self-reliance, and if we all did a little bit ourselves, we'd not only be all feel better and be warmer and healthier, it would be good for the common good.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. And grit dispenser on the back of a bike, I would imagine, would be your next question.
Only if you've got thorn-proof tyres which dig into the snow.
Councillor Bailey, followed by Councillor... I think Councillor Williamson, were you asking a question? No, sorry, I missed... Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Convener. It was just to point out a small but potentially catastrophic typo in recommendation number 4 at the end of the paper. I don't think we really intend to spend £3.6 billion. I think we intend to spend £3.6 million.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey, for pointing that out. Can we agree this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Now we come to paper 8, which is the Perth City Waste Containerisation Project. It's a long-term priority for the Council, which was included in the Waste Management Plan. And the proposal recommends providing bin hubs, which will be particularly beneficial to all who live in the city centre. I don't know whether Sheila is going to say anything about the paper, but I'm sure Sheila is here to answer any questions members may have. Councillor Parrott.
Vice Convener, thank you very much. Can I say I'm delighted to see this paper before us, the more so since the very useful briefing session that we had for councillors a while ago. My question there relates to para 2.5 on page 193. I see that a hope is expressed about the technology to be used in recording and measuring how full the communal bins are getting once deployed. I thought that that was more than an aspiration and was going to happen. Perhaps I can be given clarity on that. And if, Vice Convener, just by way of comment, so I only need one bite of the cherry, if I can say I was delighted that the new row bins were, following feedback, moved to a new location. And I think that the locations of these bins that are proposed has been looked at very carefully. But I would still ask that consideration is given if in the light of deployment there are objections to further reviewing the locations in due course. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, on the first point regarding the technology, we currently have put in a phase 2 bid to ERDF funding, which would fund the technology, the sensors within the bins. So when we spoke to you originally, that was, and still is at the moment, aspirational until we have grant funding confirmation for the sensor technology. Obviously, that would be extremely useful because it helps us then to look at how the bins are being used and the capacity and fill levels within the bins to help us make any adjustments as required. On the second point about consultation, obviously within the document, we outline that we've done extensive consultation internally, obviously with colleagues such as Roads and Parking, with yourselves, the local councillors. We've spoken to the Perth Traders Association as well as the Centre for Inclusive Living, and the project officer has gone out and spent a lot of dedicated time looking at a variety of options within the city centre, and although we've come up with 42 hubs, she's actually discounted a lot of other locations. So we're very much committed to speaking to local residents. They can either come in to see us in a drop-in session or contact the project officer, and she will be able to discuss with them for their location what options were considered, why we've discounted options as well. But obviously once we put things in place, we need to make sure we preserve the capacity. So while we can't reduce the number of hubs, we would take any concerns about siting or location and any objections, and we'd work with the local residents to resolve any issues around that.
Thank you very much. If I may, I'm conscious that a lot of work has been done in considering locations. I just ask that, if you like, final point is reserved, that if in the light of deployment, you know, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, if that raises further issues, we are still open to last-minute revision. Thank you.
I'm sure we will be. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I think this is a sensible solution to a problem in the city. But I do note on page 198 of the report that we have from the consultation that screening would be preferred from the city centre management, from planning and from Greenspace. And coming from a rural area, we have lots of lovely bin sheds, as they're lovingly called. What are we looking at as far as screening is concerned, and how are we proposing, because it certainly would enhance the city centre?
Yes, we have taken, as you said, comments from our internal colleagues on preferences, in particular some of the more high-profile locations. Some of the bin hubs are down things like Vennels and Closes, where we don't think we would require screening, but for any of the high-profile areas, we will consider that. Within the budget, we have included some money for up to 10 sort of screens at the moment, so that was something we would look at further with colleagues. I think we have mentioned in the report we'd have to look at the planning implications for any that we're putting in, so that's definitely on the table at the moment, looking at where those would be best placed.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Paragraph 2.10 on page 194 refers to residents requiring assisted lift service. I just wondered how many had required that service?
Due to the nature of the accommodation in the city centre, it's very rare that we get an assisted lift application. We've got currently one in place where we've come up with a bespoke solution with the carer of the resident to ensure that the waste is brought to the nearest bin location. So obviously going forward, if there's any further request for assisted lift, we'll look at that individual circumstance and we'll come up with a solution that's suitable for the resident.
Councillor Duff pinched half my question. But I did want to know that you know, people who will find difficulties, how it will be publicised that they can actually come forward and ask for assistance?
Obviously, as part of the rollout, when we start to do that in 2019, it will be supported by a communications plan. Very much within that, we'll be emphasising the assisted lift service and that that's available, and they can apply through us and discuss that with officers as required.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I'll try not to stray too far from the paper, but I have a query concerning to what extent the Council's input into in relation to privately operated bins. They are often very unsightly and could do with screening, are not emptied timiously, and have lots of stuff piled around a bit. I'm thinking particularly of the one we all pass at the telephone boxes at the job centre. And I think if we want to make this succeed, as we do with our own bins, do we need to include the privately operated bins as well to a certain extent?
Sheila, do you wish to make any comment?
That's not something that's been raised with us as part of this project. Obviously, if there's specific examples you wish to discuss with us, we could look at that. But again, this would come down to budget. At the moment, our budget is only for the screening for the domestic containers, and it would again depend on where the private ones are located, whether we would have remit to put anything in. It would also have to be in discussion with city centre colleagues and planning.
But I don't want to labour the point, but am I right in assuming that private bins can be put anywhere in the like?
In the main, they're meant to be stored off of payments in sort of private areas. It is difficult within the city centre. We've got a few examples where we've given permission to commercial businesses to have them on the street, but in the main, they should be presented and then removed to another location. So yeah, if there's specific examples you would like us to look at, we can look at that.
Thank you. No further questions? Then can I move the report? Any comments? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We're on to paper 9 now, which is this paper summarises the activities and progress of Perth Kinross Outdoor Access Forum to date and recommends the appointment of one new member to the forum. Can I ask for any questions on this paper? Councillor Simpson, followed by Councillor Lane.
Thank you. It's a very interesting paper, and I think the work of the Outdoor Access Forum benefits greatly if there could be consensus when they're deciding things. I'm a little disappointed to note on page 215 that there's 2 vacancies for the landowners and managers group. And I think, given my previous remarks, that the more input we have from this group, the better. And is there anything we can do to encourage these 2 vacancies to be filled?
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Andy, can you perhaps pick up on that one?
Yes, I mean, if anybody's got any contacts for landowners who may be interested in joining us, we'd be very delighted to hear from you, because they are a really important group and we'd like them to be represented on the forum. So, and we're continually looking at any opportunities to bring landowners in.
Thank you, Councillor Lane.
That was exactly my question. I would disappointed to see that there's only 50% of the available places being occupied, and I was hoping that somebody had come forward since the 26th of April, because I think they're probably the most important group that we need on board driving these projects forward. So,
I think that's a very valid point. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Can I move this report? Do we have any comments on the report? No comments. Can we agree the report? Thank you. Councillor Baird.
Thank you. Paper 10 is about the new rural footways. And can I say there is, in the Appendix 1, there's a list of footpaths. Now, we're not wanting people to start in to talk about their own little route, but there is a mistake. Item number 10 is attributed to Ward 9, and it's actually Ward 5, Castlebrae. That's because they've used the old boundary maps. So it wasn't that I was trying to steal that path back. I'm very happy to pass it on to you, Councillor Lane. So this is a policy document which outlines where we are and the list of footpaths we have. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Vice Convener. I think it's really good to see this list actually coming before us, and actual funds there to actually address the requests that have been made. One of the questions I was going to ask was, we still get planning applications coming forward. I know of at least a couple in my ward where houses are built alongside a road and there's no necessity for the developer to actually install a connecting pavement or path to the rest of the settlement. And could we just almost have that as a standard requirement? Because I'm thinking of Gurney Bank in Kinross, and also out at Moncur as well. In both these instances, the houses have been put in and there was no requirement from the developer to actually link these houses to the rest of the community. Is that something that could actually, I see Mr Littlejohn's here, is that something he could actually have a look at and see if that's possible?
I think
to have?
maybe Peter Marshall might answer that question, or David, whichever you see hiding in the back there.
We have to be mindful of proportionality, and I think in some circumstances where there's a short distance it might well be possible, but in many cases if it's a more isolated property, actually requiring the construction of a footpath to connect back into settlement, I think we'd be beyond the kind of acceptance of what would be a proportional contribution. But it would have to be on a case-by-case basis depending on the application and the location.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, but what actually happens is you get one house built and then about a year later another house is built. If each of these houses are required to install a connecting footway so it all links up when it's finished, that would be perfect. That's what I'm trying to get to happen.
Perfect world, yes, I know. Councillor Lane.
Thanks very much, and thanks for picking out that Castlebrae is indeed in Ward 5. I've maybe asked the Chief Executive here if she could put out to everybody that the boundaries changed in 2017 because we didn't know, our officers didn't know that Bertha Park High School is actually in Ward 5, and we want to claim that for ourselves. I think this is a good report, and I think it's the way it's set out, that we have criteria and everybody can see the ranking. You may not agree with the weighting that's been given to everything, but this is a really good way to put something out and a way a decision should be made on how we're dispersing funds, council funds, because then we can present it to the public and show them exactly how we got to this resolution, not as one of our colleagues mentioned last time, that it would be pet projects. So I think that it's really good that we're able to evidence the way that we're spending money, and I'm probably extremely happy because there's at least 2 in my ward there and a few just bubbling under the surface. So thanks for bringing this forward.
Is there a question there?
Question was, can we have everybody to know it's Ward 9's Ward 9 and Ward 5's Ward 5 and Ward 11's just beside it, please?
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more either, I would have to say. We spent quite a lot of time making sure that the other reports were the right wards, and we've obviously just missed that one, so my apologies for that, Councillor Lang.
Councillor Barnacle.
It's not a question. I wanted to make an observation.
But move the report and then you make a comment. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay.
Councillor Barnacle.
The thing that struck me about it was £300,000 was allocated for the footway improvements, and that actually facilitates the first 16 sites, if I'm reading this report correctly. But we've got 110 on the list. So clearly we need to think about that when we're looking at the budget, because there's a lot of footpath requests waiting in line beyond number 16. So I'm mindful of that. Yeah.
It's just to remind folk that Crooked Devon isn't in Highland Ward, and neither is Blairgowrie. So I could just maybe pick that one up on the bottom of the report there.
Thank you.
Just a typo.
To paper 11, active travel strategy. Now, I know there are lots of papers here, but we are actually doing them individually as instructed. So if anyone has got any comments or questions on the first one is the Blairgowrie footway shared use. Any questions on this paper? Agreed? Inchture, Moncur Road, Main Road, Ward 1. Quite happy with that? Agreed. Huntingtower Road, Ruthvenfield, Ward 5. Agreed, good. Glenalmond, Ward 9. Agreed. As we flip through the pages. Tibbermore, Ward 9. Agreed. My lucky day. Now we come on to the proposed green roads, additional roads. We've got Muthill, Ward 7. This has actually all been put together as the one. Okay. Longforgan, Ward 1. New Alyth in Ward 2. Blairgowrie and Aberargie, Ward 9. Then we come on to spare 17. Variation to waiting restrictions, Monart Road and Vassart Road in Perth, which is Ward 12. Sound of happiness there from Perth City Councillors. And now we have the amendment to the list of public roads, which is paper 18. And these are mostly housing developments. Any questions or comments? Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That's the end of the Environment Infrastructure meeting for September. Thank you all very much indeed for your attendance and your questions and your comments.